Bridget, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I was thinking about how to introduce you ahead of time, and while I don't have a concrete description, I was thinking about the first time that we met. And I don't know if you remember this, but I remember the exact moment that I met you because I believe that we were both sitting on a couch. So we were on the same retreat in Mexico, but I
Yeah.
want to say from my memory, it was like close to the end of the retreat before we had really interacted. And we were both sitting on a couch and you were next to me and someone like referenced your feet and they were like, "Oh, Bridget has frostbite." And we were in the tropics in Mexico. And I was like, "What do you mean you have frostbite?" And you were like, "Oh yeah, well I just skied across all of Greenland and then I came here." And I was like, "What? You need to be my friend." And so that's
And
like my first memory of you.
so, for clarification, I wish that the frostbite was on my feet. The frostbite was actually on my butt and my thighs.
What?
Yeah,
My mind must have
it must have like made it more
classified it.
graceful.
It made it make more sense.
Yeah, it's like it just makes it more graceful than like actually women hold the most fat on their butt and their thighs, and cellulite is the gift that keeps on giving. It freezes when it's cold. And
Oh
so
my God.
then not only
Funny.
does it freeze, it then when you fly to tropical climates after you've been in like minus 30, minus 40 degrees Celsius, you then start to defrost it and then it starts to get infected. And then on top of that, it becomes into like this huge like infection rash across your body. So thank you, cellulite. Really
That's
love that.
hilarious. Well, it's funny to me that I don't even remember that part. I only remember just like my mind was just like, "Oh yeah, she had frostbite on her feet." But you must have told me all of that.
Yeah.
God, that's terrible.
Yeah, that was like a really wild retreat because I'd just come back from Greenland and there was like my whole senses, like I'd only seen five people for the last like 35 days. And we'd been in like just white. And the only colors we saw were the colors of that we were wearing. And then like when a bird flew over the sky, it was like the most amazing, magnificent thing in the world because we could see something other than being inside this like giant white ping pong ball. And like you only heard the sounds of your skis on ice. And then like you were eating this like all this dry food. Um, and so basically when I got to Mexico, it was just like an assault of the senses. So it was like eating foods of all like freshness and goodness, and then like all these noises and everything like that. And then all these women were like tantrically like slowly eating their food and making love to it. And I was like this ravenous beast who'd been eating like 600,000, like it was 6,000 calories a day. I think I was hitting at that point. And I was just like, no, 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 is there any spare food anywhere, please? And all these girls are like so beautifully, like tantrically, like making love to life. And I was just like a ravenous beast amongst everyone.
Did they even give us meat? I don't even know
No, they didn't.
if
They didn't.
were you were eating 6,000 calories a day in Greenland
Yeah, I was
because of
literally
all the
like,
cold and the activity? Is that why?
yeah. So basically, like I was like, I'm working in the metric system. Sorry, Americans. But basically, I was dragging a sled that was just under 80 kilograms, which is like more than what I weigh. And it was minus 30 most days. And so
Does it get
that
wrapped
alone,
around your waist? Is that
yeah, so
like
there's
a
like a
sled?
little, yeah, there's like a little harness and stuff that wraps around your waist and does that. And so you're just basically like walking forward. And we would be literally skiing on the ice for between 12 to 24 hours sometimes. Like, and so literally I'd be carrying the sled for like could be 60 kilometers, could be like it was just crazy. And so I was literally eating a huge block of chocolate, like it would have been 300 or 400 grams of chocolate a day. I was eating an entire pack, like the big pack of Pringles a day. And like I lost, so I went on a fat diet before I went on this ski trip. And I
Like
put on,
keto?
no, like a
I mean
fat
fat
diet.
diet.
Like I literally
Oh,
loaded,
like you tried to put on fat?
I had to put on like 15 extra kilograms. And so I put on 15 extra kilograms before I
That's
went to
like 30
Greenland.
pounds,
That's 30
right?
pounds. Yeah. And so I put
Wow.
15 extra kilograms on. And then when I got out of Greenland, I'd lost 10 from my actual average. So I'd lost 25 kilograms while I'm there eating 6,000 calories a day.
Wow. Isn't that
Yeah,
absolutely fascinating? Is that from the activity or from the cold or from both?
both, a mixture of
From
both.
both.
Yeah,
That's insane.
yeah.
Has that, so I know we're gonna go into our like sort of main topic.
Distracted.
You just have such a like full, very diverse life of like many different experiences. I feel like we could go into so many of them. But I'm curious about your relationship with food. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like knowing that and having that experience, I'm curious what impact that had on your relationship with food, or if it changed it at all, or if you always had like a food as fuel sort of.
No. I guess like when I'm leading outdoor expeditions, like I'm a tourist, so I love food. And like if you want to lure me into a relationship, I realized recently that I'd gone on dates because the food was good. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's so bad. You keep on getting lured into something because the food is there. Like I love food. And outdoor expeditions, you're often eating this like dried, dehydrated, salted stuff. So the only way that it's affected my food doing all these trips is that I can't stand oats. I cannot stand wraps. Like I will never eat them again because they're so plain and I've had them so much on these expeditions. So there's certain things like that that I'm like, I won't touch. And when I get home from an expedition, all I want is like fresh goodness in my body. So it hasn't, yeah, I've always looked at food as a way of like, it's a gift that we get to have every day. And I
Uh-huh.
love it. And then it's also like, I know because I am generally in training, like whether it's just I'm doing outdoor expeditions and taking people to extreme places, or it's I'm training for the body surfing world champs, I need to have enough fuel
Yeah.
to keep going. Yeah.
That's what you're doing right now. You could tell
Yeah.
everyone. When are the body surfing world champs?
They're the end of April. They start for 10 days and they're normally held in like Hawaii. And this year they're being held in Australia. So I'm super excited.
Do you have a good chance to win?
Winning might be a little extreme, but
Like,
basically, like
what makes you win?
it's judged on if you can do tricks. So if you imagine like with surfing, you're on the board, you go through barrels, and you'll get more points if you go through like barrels on a surfboard, and if you do all these different tricks as well. So body surfing is kind of similar. It's like the longest ride, so as far as you can possibly go. And then you also want to go through barrels, and then you also want to be able to do flips and tricks and all those sorts of things while on it. So the technicalities, like you get more points for like a more impressive trick. And so it's to me, it's like when I was a kid, my mum taught me how to body surf, and it's the funnest feeling in the world because there's nothing between you and the wave. And it's like portaling you through the water. And it just feels like you're dancing on the water, like when you actually start doing tricks in it and you're literally being dragged through. Like I always look at waves as if they're like the orgasm of like the womb of the earth. Like ocean is like the womb of the earth. And you're literally like riding this like orgasmic wave and just like spinning and flipping and dancing through it. And it just feels so magical.
Wow. When I read your email, I said out loud, I was like, oh my God, Bridget is doing, I was like, she's training for the World Body Surfing Championship. I was like, what is body surfing? And Jordan was like, oh, you have like a little board. And I was like, no, I think that it means like no board. And he was like, nuh-uh. And I was like, yeah. And then I looked it up and I was like, that is what it means. But we were both like, that's so unfathomable. But then I watched
Yeah.
it people do it. So that's amazing. You can do tricks like that.
Yeah. It's uh, I was working in Antarctica last year for 6 months, and I came back and it was a similar experience to when I came back from Greenland, where all I'd seen was like white and was used to seeing icebergs every single day and the same people every single day. And your whole sensory system, as I said, is completely overloaded. So you come back into a city and you start to hear car noises and it just like it blows everything out. And like even hearing like the meters as people are like crossing the street and those kinds of noises, it's mind blowing to you. Like it just completely like blows your system out. And I was really struggling to sort of like get back into life because I'd just come from, as I said, somewhere where it was just seeing white, eating like very good food down there and stuff like that. But it was like a real community experience and it was really beautiful. And then I came back to this like city where I had to work at a university as a lecturer and I was like jumping straight back into work and I couldn't do the crossover very well. And so I went to go body surfing because it's my favorite thing in the world to do. And I knew there was a world championship and I'd always dreamed since I was like 16 to be like a world champion of body surfing. And I went down to this beach that I've been going to since I was a little kid. And there's this like group of men. Oh, there's actually some women in there as well. And they're all like 60 years old and plus. And so you got these 60s, 70s, 80-year-old dudes that come down to the beach every single morning. And when I was young, they were super exclusive and they were like, they wouldn't even talk to you. Like they were just doing their own thing. And anyway, I got accepted into this group and they are the coolest human beings in the world. So basically, like all my best friends are like in their 60s and 70s. And it was like having the same banter, like because down in Antarctica, I would hang out with all these like tradies, like tradespeople. And they just were so funny. Like they just have so much banter every single day, and you'd be laughing and like going into the ocean with these guys. They knew the waves, so they taught me how to read all the waves perfectly. They taught me how to do tricks. And basically like trains me up for the competitions. And then they like get so excited when you're in the competitions and all of them. So I have like this crew of like just like goats basically being there supporting me at competitions now.
How did you get accepted?
I randomly ran into somebody during the day who was a part of this crew, and it used to be, as I said, very exclusive. Like you actually had to go through initiations and they wouldn't let you in for like years or months or whatever. And they wouldn't even speak to people who were younger. And then obviously, as they're older humans, those people, since I was 16, have kind of like died off, and the younger generation of older humans have come through and they're way more inclusive. And so they just love people who are like into the sport. And so, yeah, they would just like, you just start talking to them and it's just a ritual. Like every single day, go down with the old boys and play in the waves.
Oh, have you
Yeah.
been doing a lot of trips to like all different places?
No, because I was locked in Australia. Obviously for, I mean, if we're talking about since we have sort of chatted and stuff like that, most of COVID I was locked in Australia. And Antarctica was like probably the first big trip that I did since being able to get out. Like I went to the Maldives and did some diving, like free diving there and stuff, but basically hadn't been able to exit without all the documentation, which I do not have. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You couldn't leave the country.
couldn't leave the country.
Was that in Australia? Right. Australia, were you not allowed to, you couldn't leave even if the place you were going would have let you in?
Yeah, couldn't leave. Yeah.
Because you couldn't get on a plane.
Wasn't allowed on the plane, and wasn't allowed back into Australia for a while as well. So you had to have like reason that you were being able to leave. And so during actual COVID, you had to have like basically an approval to leave the country. And then to be able to even get on a plane, you needed all the certifications. That
That
was
was
later.
worse than here.
That was, yeah. So that was like 2.5 or 3 years after COVID started. You needed certifications to even get on a plane. And
Because
so,
we had that with planes. I'm
yeah,
trying to think of, I guess, because I could have driven still into the States. I just
yeah,
didn't because Jordan couldn't come with me.
yeah. So I obviously we can't
You can't
like
drive. Yeah.
can't drive anywhere.
But
So
would you have even been allowed to? I guess not, right? Because you're saying you
there was a certain amount of years. So it was
could you
probably
take a
18
boat?
months. No, I can't take a boat because you need to be able to be certified too. And there's no boats that like you wouldn't catch a boat to New Zealand or anything like that. So yeah, so basically like I had to dabble around that fact for like 3 years. pretty much. Yeah.
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 So when did you start traveling again?
So I started in the middle of 2023. That's the first time that I did a trip. So basically that's the longest amount of time. So from 2020 to April 2023. And that's when it started to ease up, was the beginning of 2023.
Mm.
They still ask for it everywhere. Like even for jobs that you apply for, it's still like all a part of it. But yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, so that was the longest amount of time that I've ever spent in my life in Australia, adult life, basically, because I've been traveling since I was 18. So it was a very, very humbling experience, but very cool as well, because I got to see a lot of nature around my state that I didn't even realize existed. And now I have these favorite places on earth that I didn't realize existed before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like you have been exposed to a lot of different places, a lot of different types of people.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how that's influenced, like, what do you see overall in what's happening in the world right now? I feel like you have such a good picture of a lot of people and a lot of different variety.
Yeah. It's it's kind of like I don't like to go into the fear vibrations of things because I think there's so much fear on every single side. And as soon as you start talking about sides, like the thing is, like the ultimate thing is separation, this individualization and like absolute separation. So you can be in that real egoic place.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting because I also see the shift that's happening. And having traveled and lived in very remote areas around the world, I've had a lot of ability to be, I guess, with different elders,
Mhm.
um, elders of different Indigenous populations, and even like my own elders here and Indigenous elders here as well. And it's like, it's really interesting because there's this correlation between their stories. And I think that's the most powerful thing is like when you start to see the correlations between the elders' stories that they've passed down orally for tens of thousands of years.
Mhm.
And there is a correlation between a lot of their stories to do with like we mentioned sort of around climate change, and they speak of it as if the poles are shifting. And
Mhm.
that story has been passed down in African cultures, in like Native American cultures, like it's passed down in Polynesian cultures, etc. Like that the poles shift. Um, and even looking at research that came out of like some of the scientists' work that I was like around in Antarctica, they've tracked like these million-year ice cores, like literally taking ice cores up to 1 million years deep in Antarctica. And so they've been able to track the temperature changes. And every 6 to 12,000 years, there's this huge shift in temperature.
Mhm.
Um, and it's super interesting that that science reflects what the elders have been passing down through their
Mhm.
stories. And like, as I said, the other thing that I really notice right now, and I know that the gene keys, like there's this gene key, I think it's number 55 or something, talks about it. And it talks about like going from victimization to freedom. And it's like there's this element of separating people, one from each other, because like we innately fear what is different to us.
Mhm.
But there's this element of victimization and individualization, like labeling ourselves to the max of what we can possibly be to be separate and different from everybody else.
Mhm.
And that, like, if you look at it in a spiritual term, that can be egoic, of course. And
Mhm.
like when you can liberate yourself from that and just actually realize that there's this sense of like one consciousness that we can actually tap into,
Yeah.
there's this absolute freedom on the other side of it. And I always think about it in the respect of like the separation from nature. and the separation from community and the separation from our bodily wisdom, the smashing of like women first and foremost, because like whenever people are seeking to control a certain people, it starts with breaking down the women. It starts with separating them from their bodily wisdom, their intuition, their like traditions, their singing, their like every way that any type of like stuff has been passed down through them. Separation from knowledge. And it starts there, and then it starts to affect entire families because then they're able to control easier. And I also see like the guilt side of that, being used in all different ways to control people. And it's like we used to have religions that could control people by like acts of sin or this or that, but religions have started to break down and not had as many followers in, you know, recent years. And so when you throw things out like climate change, and don't get me wrong, like I truly believe that we can do a hell of a lot better to take care of the environment and really nurture and foster it. But this changing of climate across time has always happened in its rhythms and cycles. It breathes out, like the earth breathes out and breathes in. And this is what the elders often talk about, especially the indigenous elders here, is that it breathes out and it breathes in. And like there's certain cycles when it gets closer to the sun. That doesn't mean that we're treating the earth well at all, of course. But, you know, there's this way of being able to guilt trip people that if they're not following a certain thing or doing a certain thing, then they're a bad human being and they're playing on our hearts. Like they're playing on our hearts of like, oh, but I need to be better. Oh, and it's like this innate sort of sense of like, yeah, wanting to do better for the greater good, I guess. And it's a way of controlling, and you know, you can step on people by canceling them, or burning the witches or whatever we want to talk about. It's like you can do that to control people questioning anything. And it's like you've got, as I said, going back to this victimization factor, you've got a whole groups of people who are coming from this place of deep trauma. And it's trauma that everybody has to process. Like we all are a victim in some respect to something that's happened to us, all the things that have happened to us. And it's like when you are fighting hate with hate, or oppression, fighting oppression with other types of oppression, like if we talk about like some of the things that women are saying about men these days, and it's, if men said the same thing about women, like it's just brutal, you know? And so I see that in all domains, that we're not questioning these behaviors right now, because then you become like, oh, you're patriarchal, you're this, you're that. And it's just a very interesting time, because it can be, if you look at the other side of it. And of course, we're going to go through states of victimization and get into our sort of sovereign personal power. But it's like, if you look at the other side of it, there's this really beautiful thing that's available to us. And as I said, like when you can connect back in to the ways in which, I guess, nature operates. And I think when you stop seeing yourself as separate to nature, because people are sort of operating in this world with a sense of placelessness. They don't know where they are in the world. They're not doing rites of passage. They're not like having this strong community who helps them connect. And nature itself is a strong community. Like you can get messages from the ocean, you can get messages from like, you know, from the trees, from the animals, etc. if you tap in and if you listen and you tune in. And people are talking about how quickly like AI is skyrocketing and, you know, going through all of this like crazy like ability to do all these things. But if you look at the freedom side of us and the upgrades that we're doing when we actually connect deeply back into that one consciousness, that unity consciousness, and I don't just talk about that in respect of humans, it's like every single thing in our world, you can tap into that same consciousness and speed of connection as you can that AI is doing. Like you can tap into the same sort of consciousness if somebody's learned a skill over there. You can actually astrally tap into that and be able to know that skill through that person's energetic streams. You can quite literally, like, we're listening to things like the telepathy tapes. And it's like, I've always known that telepathy is real because I've had that innate connection with certain people. But now it's like, this is a mainstream concept. Like,
Mhm.
do we even need certain amounts? Like, if we really tune in and tap in, there's this innate magical world that exists around us that we can get into and be a part of. Um, and I just think, it's a really powerful time to be alive if we look at it in that magical, like we're literally in a Harry Potter world if we want to tune in.
Yeah. I've come to this place too of it's a really exciting time actually.
Mm,
Like, uh, up until maybe, I don't know, 6 months, a year ago, I was really still terrified. Like, I was afraid of AI. I was afraid of
yeah,
technology. I was afraid of how much things were changing. And I still had this grief of, like, we've ruined the world, is
yep,
kind of this, like, internalized thing I had of, like, humans have just gone in such a bad direction. We've ruined the whole earth. And for a long time in my 20s, I just felt like like the earth would be better without humans on it. That was like a
yep.
genuine belief that I
Mm,
had. And something that you were just talking about that I think it touches on a question that I have been feeling the most lately, and everything I think about and everything I've been doing is this question. You sort of termed it as like the vibration of fear or the vibration of maybe love would be the opposite there. And I've been feeling into like, so I've become more Christian, I would say, which is so
mhm,
weird. Like I haven't, maybe by the time of me publishing this, I'll have like talked about it more publicly, but not in a like going to church, like following all what somebody else is telling me, but more from my own heart, like starting to read the Bible and starting to be like, what's here? And the thing that I felt the most is this greater thing that I think is God, that I think you could also term consciousness, this one
mhm,
bigger thing. And what I think is amazing is like what I feel in feeling into God and love and like what are we living for? Like what is the purpose of us here as humans? There was a guy recently named Thomas Campbell. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was on Joe Rogan. He's a physicist, but he has his
mm,
greatest theory of everything. He calls it my big toe because it's theory of everything. But he talks about, he's not religious at all, but he comes at it. He's saying the exact same things in a very different way, where he talks about, he's kind of talking about it as being in a virtual reality. And he's saying, like, we're all sort of playing these characters, but we're all a piece of this greater consciousness.
yeah,
And the purpose of that is to get away from entropy, which is like bringing us, whenever we're in fear, we're going down and down into entropy. And whenever we're in love, we're evolving. And that's the purpose of us all, is to do things from love. And there's this beautiful through line in, I think, a lot of religious texts as well, even though they've been used, I think, by humans at times to control in these more like culty type narratives of control way, guilt. You know what's interesting about the word sin? That the word sin initially meant to miss the mark.
mm,
Like it just
mhm,
meant, it didn't mean like you're bad and are a terrible person and what, it just means like you're off.
yeah,
It's kind of and I think there's this, you spoke about it, the same thing I've been feeling into, like, and I wrote this piece recently of how I feel like sexual liberation movement was really just not good overall for me. And I think the distinction is that I was living for my ego,
mhm,
just for me, like, oh, I want to be liberated. I want to have fun. I want to do whatever. And what was missing was this greater uh love, like this like
yeah,
bigger feeling purpose behind it all. And I think
yeah,
like it sounds to me like you're saying the kind of same thing there, and I feel like it's a question I think is at the root of almost anything right now, because it's like you can't even really talk about anything without kind of coming back to what are like is my deepest value to live for that love, or is it to live for like my ego and my idea of myself and who I should get to be and what I should get to have?
And my identity is wrapped up in these specific
Identity.
things. And I like, as I said, this is the bit that I see, is that there's a real, because people actually have this sense of placelessness. And I talk about that in the respect of, as I said, like people are lost. And it's like, oh, here's all this AI. And then you can feel super connected, but you're actually more lonely than ever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you step back from that and you're either in a community that is around you, whether you're going to church, whether you're surrounded by pure love, like whatever your community looks like, my old boys that I go body surfing with. But if you actually step even further back from that and go, if I can have a conversation with the trees, if I can have a conversation with the ocean, if I was living in the woods alone, I would be surrounded by such an immense web of life that
Mm-hmm.
I could actually tap into, tune into, create relationships with. I'm I'm never lost. Like,
Yeah.
earth beneath me, sky above me, breath within me. I'm never lost.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always here held. And it just takes tuning out of that egoic identity, because I can say it, like, as soon as I start getting into those habits of scrolling, of like looking at other things, or being like, oh my God, I'm not making the money that I wanted to have. Oh my God, like I can go into any of that sort of materialistic sort of what taps your ego. Oh, I thought I'd be further along in life by doing this or doing that. When I actually come into, who am I being as a human being today, here, right now? Where is the depth of love that, like, the art that is coming from your heart? Like, what is that being expressed in the world every single day? And you just come back into even like taking a breath, looking at the ocean, looking at the sky. There's this deep sense of like connection, barefoot on the earth, looking at the sky and the stars above. And it's this infiniteness that's available to us.
Mm-hmm. I have a mentor who says that like your basically are your thoughts light or are they heavy? And if they're
Mm.
like so heavy, we don't have to pay attention to and believe those ones. Like place the attention on the light thoughts and the love and like our purpose is to feel good.
Yeah.
And I feel like what we've done largely as a society is right now we're focusing on a lot of the pain to the detriment of everyone. And like to
Yeah.
some like we should, it's good to acknowledge it. Like you can't just go your whole life burying it and just pretending nothing ever happened. And but like there is this level of we're making everybody like we're validating and affirming trauma and pain and suffering and like less privilege and just like, oh, you can't, you're gonna have a harder time than other people. And just like really,
Mm.
we're focusing on that so much. And I think that that increases the more that we do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's creating more separation. It's like, as you said, you obviously have to look at a wound to be
Mhm.
able to heal the wound. But when you're like digging around, scraping into the barrel of it, like pulling it apart and like shoving more stuff in, being like more poison into that wound, being like, you're a victim and you're a victim and you're a victim and you deserve this, this, and this. And like, then you're creating something that festers. And we're operating from, as I said, like this way of like, it's like hate fighting hate.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you come back and get back to what we were saying, like that analogy of just like looking at the wound and seeing,
Hmm.
could have done this differently. We could do this differently in the future. We're going to be aware of this. Like, yeah, there's steps forward from there.
Hmm.
And I feel like even in the spiritual sort of realms, there's a lot of like learning from suffering,
Yeah.
learning from struggles. And like I'm sure that we've all got like people in our generations who have said, you know, you're not going to get anywhere unless you like suffer and strive and, you know, work, blah, blah, blah. Like there's all those words. And it's like, what about like the learning from joy, the
Yeah.
learning from love? Because that's such a huge thing too. And yeah, I think it's interesting as well because like you spoke about sort of like Christian in that seeing everything as God and one consciousness. And I often look at it as in Christ consciousness. Because if you look at some of the places like Jesus sort of studied as well, like I don't know if I grew up as a Christian. I don't know if I label myself as a Christian anymore. But all of those learnings have been there. And it's just an interesting way if you look at Jesus's journey, and this is like a whole podcast in itself, if you want to dabble into that. But like where he studied in the world and what his teachings actually sort of meant and how they've been manipulated and used to say different things. But if you actually look back at the pure teaching in itself, yeah, you can see a lot of correlations between chakras and all sorts of stuff that is this deep connection to like this divinity within and
I think
this,
even Jesus grew up as a carpenter,
yeah.
right? And like, I think there's even something in that. I think he spent like the first 30 years of his life doing carpentry. Like, there's something very human in this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we look down on things like that as like not spiritual,
Yeah.
but that,
I like I was dating a guy a while ago and I'd always written on my list like what a deeply spiritual man, etc. But
uh,
then like I just was like why would I want that? It's and when I look like when I say that it's like the people who have
it's like,
no sorry
sorry,
go.
I don't want to interrupt you. It's like feminine. I feel like when you ask for that, what you end up getting a lot in this day and age is like men who are really feminine who are performing spirituality.
Yeah, there's like this lack of being able to take responsibility for stuff and like using of spiritual phrases that like are just fluff. Like it's all like there's no depth, there's no weight, there's no earthiness to it. And I was dating a guy who would like a while ago, and he was a electrician, and he was the most spiritual person I have ever met without being spiritual because he was so in alignment with his values and with his integrity, and his actions every single day matched those values. And
Yeah.
it was like he was just so himself, so innately authentic. And after that, I was like, wow, like I have just been blessed with this human being who is just so innately authentic and who is a tradesperson and just like why I don't know would I be seeking like a spiritual person who's gonna like be like I'm downloading the codes and many blessings to all of you. It's like let me hold space for you. No, fucker, like just ask me the right questions. Like be there, be present,
Yeah.
be
That was one of the things that I loved about Jordan when I first met him was that he like laughed at all that stuff. Like
yeah.
even though he had like studied similar things to me and like we had both been in like overlapping worlds, he was just so quick to be able to be like, that's all bullshit, or just like these people, like, and it's like there is, you said in your when we wrote to each other before and you had mentioned about how often like more spiritual people, and I think in this context, maybe not overall, but like we're talking mostly new age spirituality because I know that's a
Yeah.
big part of what we've both been in. Um, are like less resilient than a
Mm,
lot of people that you've met. And I think I started to just notice this when we first moved to where we're living right now on this island because there's a lot of old people here and a lot of
yeah.
people who have lived here for many decades. And like the island didn't even get electricity until I think like the late 80s or the 90s. Like there was, people who moved here back when these people moved here moved to like off the grid nothing. Like they just, they
Mm,
were doing everything themselves. And so there's this particular quality of older person who tends to live here who and we have met a couple of them where like there's this very deep presence, and I have no idea what their spiritual or religious or any sort of beliefs might be. I just know that in being around them, they're
Hmm.
like super grounded,
Yeah.
super present, and kind of like unruffled by life.
Yes. Yes.
And that I think is like that to me is almost like the most spiritual you can be. Like you're because
It
you're
is.
connected to
Yeah.
something, like to that integrity that you say, and to I think to peace
And
almost.
this deep connection to like everyday life.
Yeah.
And I the best way to describe this is, so recently, the last 6 months, I've had to take off life a little bit. Because my parents, like, my dad's been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so he was doing chemo for the last 6 months. And I was the only unmarried, unchilded child of theirs. Like, there's 5 kids in my family. And so I had the most flexible schedule to be able to just like, okay, I can take off life. I can do this. And my mother uh, is early stages of dementia as well. And so basically, I went home eh, and took care of this sort of like all for chemo, cooking, cleaning, all the things. And my siblings are also doing everything that they possibly could around this. And it's like, it's that community that in touchness with every single day life. But there's obviously like throughout this all, there's been a lot of hard days. Like I would say this has been probably some of the toughest 6 months of my entire life, is
Yeah.
dabbling in what has been going on. And it was just a really interesting, because I had, my friends from my spiritual sort of world. And then I have all my outdoor friends who are spiritual in their own way, like just their deep connection to life and adventure and like the earth and everything from, but they're not going to be talking about like the codes that we can download from Egypt.
Yeah.
They're not going to be talking about that sort of stuff, or like I did this tantric practice and like breathed right out microcosmic
Oh,
orgasms myself to whatever. Um, but they're innately spiritual people. And what I found was, when I deeply needed people and I needed someone to, hold my hand, pick me up a little bit as I was falling, the spiritual people had every excuse in the world not to show up, not to be there, not to, and I would call it resilience, of like this connection to community, that there are shit days. Like, not
yeah.
every day it's going to be like, I'm floating in this peaceful realm up here. It's,
Yeah.
you are going to go through deep struggles in life. And I think a deeply spiritual practice is actually being able to be there for your community. And while I was being there for my family community, I needed people to help me remember like joy in life as well. And I just found that the people that I work with doing the outdoor trips, um, they there's something about that tenacity. Like when you're on an outdoor trip and you're working with a co-leader and you're taking care of a whole bunch of students, people, whatever, you guys are in a lot of times like a life and death situation. You are relying on each other to survive. You are an innate little community yourselves. And you trust each other. You have to have hard conversations. You have to conflict resolute like really, really quickly. And you need to be able to talk about everything. And get that energy dispersed quickly, because you don't want it to affect the the trip or what you're doing or the decisions that you're making, because that can actually make danger for everybody.
Mm.
And it's like through that, you're also experiencing the utmost like magical experiences of your entire life together. And so you're having these extreme highs and these extreme, like, you're being affected by the force of nature every single day. And if you're a douchebag in nature, that action consequence of it is going to show people very quickly who you are as a person. Like, it strips you raw. Like
Hmm.
there is no hiding in nature. If you're a
Yeah.
douchebag underneath everything and you're not a community person, it's going to show. And these were the people who showed up every single day, checked in on me, like for weeks and weeks on end. Even if they didn't hear anything from me, they would still check in.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that's also missing in this, as I said, this like this new age spiritual world is like this disconnection from real
Yeah.
community, like real being there for people because, oh, but I have my boundaries and I have my peace and I need to protect my peace. And it's like, well, what about actually like still being grassroots?
Hmm.
You know, what are you going to do when you're in a situation that's hard?
Hmm.
Yeah.
There is no real resilience in that way. I think it's throughout the new agey world, and I think it's also through just like all of wokeness in this way. There's
Mm,
like this victim, um, this really placing this emphasis on pain. Like this, like, oh,
yeah.
I'm having a hard time, and then that becomes my identity, like uh being really anxious. You mentioned
Yeah.
like everyone who's like, oh, I have ADHD
I
now.
have ADHD. Oh, maybe actually I have an addiction to technology, but no, it's ADHD. And it's
It's
like, that's
so
why I can't do this thing.
I don't really understand because I feel like I have a lot of the symptoms of
Yeah.
ADHD. I just feel like could anybody be ADHD? Anyway,
Well,
there's just
everyone, like,
everyone has
I
it.
couldn't, like, I couldn't do school at all. I couldn't
Uh,
concentrate. And it's just like,
I think who knows, there's so many different, like, I've heard people say, like, oh, it's like mineral imbalances in your body can show up as ADHD or this or that can be ADHD or whatever, but it's like, I don't know. I think we start just labeling everything at some point.
yes.
But it's just this like I've really noticed how we get so addicted and I think people get so bothered by this and I get it because they want to be when you're in pain and then you're told that your pain is really valid and you're like really like this is identity like this is now your identity. I was reading an article the other day about how it was describing how therapists are now taught to work with people of like, whatever minority identity, whether they're like a
Yeah.
racial minority or an LGBTQ, but they're now taught to like there's no real like the resilience is now flipped around into being like, yes, you are having a hard time because look at the systems around you, like they are set up to hurt you and make you fail. And it's like I feel like we can acknowledge any real, you know, hard things that might be in someone's way while
Mm.
also building them up to be like, we can overcome these things. Because otherwise, what do you do? Like, you always just then reaffirm that the person is suffering, and then they end up in this hole. I've seen it a lot. I don't know if you know, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder last year. The year
Mm.
it is not something I identify with. I really think I'm gonna heal it. Like I feel like it's in the process of healing. I just don't think it's a real thing. The more I learn,
Power of the mind.
the more I learn about it, the more that I like talk to people who have healed because there are so many of them. Um, the more I'm just like, I really do think it was all a creation of my mind. And that's
Mm.
not like a blame on myself. It's just like there were so many things that happened at that point in my life, and I just think it just caused this buildup of my emotions, my narrative through
Yep.
my whole life, and then all the stress that happened. And when I would look at these groups of people, like there are so many groups of people they have chronic illnesses and now they have like names for them and they're like, oh, I'm disabled. And oh, I know someone who is like super smart, a doctor, now identifies as they, them, and realized he was autistic. So now he identifies as disabled. Like, what happens to you when you start identifying as disabled? This is so obvious to me. Like, I don't think it's good at all for anybody. Um, but there's just this emphasis on like, Oh, there's a lot of coddling. It's become very clear to me that like there are certain personalities who would not get chronically ill. Like I see certain like these older men who have this like deep rootedness.
Yeah.
Or like, you know who I like listening to? I brought him up on a podcast the other day too, Jocko Willink. You know?
I don't know him.
You
No.
don't you would
I
love
don't know.
he's a Navy SEAL guy.
Yeah.
But he's written a lot of like, I think he wrote a book called Extreme Leadership, which I haven't read, but he has a lot of quotes from him floating out there.
Mm,
He fought a lot in different wars. So he's led teams of guys who've gone to war. He's watched a lot of his guys die. You know,
yep.
he's been a leader in all of these extreme situations. There's songs, there's people have taken quotes by him and put them into music. So sometimes when I work out, I listen to this. Uh, the artist name is Akira the Dawn, and then he
Okay,
puts
I'm gonna
like
need all of this.
I'll have to put it in the show notes for everybody. But it's like he has a song that's like good. Like he talks
Yeah.
about like when something goes wrong, like good, you learn from it. Like he just has this very no bullshit, like everything is an opportunity. And he tells these stories of like and when I listen to somebody like that, I can feel my own like lack of that was not I have my own resilience in certain ways, I know that, but like when I look at like how anxious my 20s were and like how
Mm.
destabilized I've felt at different points, I see why I ended up the way that I did. Because like you look at a guy like that and like he's seen so many worse things than I've ever seen in my life. But there's
I,
this like rootedness.
yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing that you speak of, like the people who have seen so much worse. Like I always think about some of the people that I've lived with in places like Tanzania, etc., and their life stories and what they've been through. But my God, like the rootedness that they have within themselves, within their community, within joy and positivity. And it's not that like, fake positivity, like everything's fine. It's like real, like can see the magic in life in every single moment.
Mhm.
Everything's an opportunity, as you said, like, and I think it's really interesting just touching back on what you were talking about with like you don't want to identify with that label of like that's the and I there's a couple of things that come through to me when you talk about that sort of stuff because elders that I've studied under they sort of teach that everything that is like sort of mental health or physical health etc is actually a spiritual health problem
Mhm.
and it comes from like patterns or like loops that you created in your mind and then that's affecting like and as soon as you start to like unravel those sorts of things you can move forward in time and I think about like so I had a brain injury in Canada where I was pretty deeply affected and my balance was shot like I could barely walk without being able like falling over there was a time where I could barely like formulate sentences in my mind and people would ask me questions and I couldn't respond properly. And before that point I'd done my adventure degree, I'd been a part of a circus school, like had some pretty high level like skills at life. And they were like, great, we've done enough rehab to be able to get you to walk through a grocery store and pick out your stuff. This is woohoo, you are gonna live life. And I just looked at them and I was like, is this it? Like, is this what you expect? And they're like, yep. And I was like, no, that, like, no, this is not the level that I'm going to do and that I'm going to be. And they like gave me a time limit of how long it would possibly take to improve things. And I was like, I'm not going to listen to any of that. And yeah, it's like it's interesting because it sometimes affects me today, but I basically like live a life where you would never know that that happened to me.
Mhm.
And I met a woman when I was freediving in the Maldives. Like we were freediving with tiger sharks, which is something pretty cool because you've really got to be like super centered within yourself. And you pretty much have to be the alpha. So you're literally like playing chicken. The tiger sharks will come at you. And if you balk or if you like go back up to the surface and like remember you're not with the tank. So you're got to regulate your heartbeat under there, be super calm as this tiger shark is coming at you so that because it can feel your heartbeat through the water. And it's
Mhm.
like if you're like beating really fast, it knows that you're prey. And so you got to be really, really calm, look it in the eyes, and basically like swim a little bit at it.
Yeah.
Literally playing chicken with it. And it was a pretty magical experience. And she was talking to me about when she was 23 and she was in her 50s. She was 23, she was diagnosed with, I don't know if I'm not going to get the disease right, but it's basically like the muscular disorder where it starts to eat itself, like everything starts to eat itself.
Mm.
And so she was expected to die within sort of like 15 to 20 years. And she was like, no, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
not doing that. And she has never gone back to the doctors. Like, I think she went back because she started to feel a little bit of blindness. And she was like, I'm not doing blindness. And this was in her 50s. And she'd been traveling all around the world, did her thing. And she was like, that is not a thing. And when they did like ultrasounds and x-rays and all the things in her 50s, and they knew her medical record said that she'd been diagnosed with this disease back then and hadn't had any treatment whatsoever. And they were just like, it's mind blowing. Like you've actually reversed stuff in your body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does she credit just her, like basically just being like, no,
Yeah.
do
She
that?
credits like, I'm not doing that. That's
Yeah.
that's not where life is at. Like
There
it's
seems
not
to
going
be,
to affect
I've
me.
heard a number of stories with people like that where, because the key is, it seems to be like you can't just completely ignore it in the sense of like being afraid of it, but just sort of like pretending it's not there. Because I did
Mm,
that for a little, it just got worse, right? But I've heard from people who have just been like, no, like, what do you, like, I don't even believe that.
yeah.
I've just moved on and been fine. Um, and for everybody else, there's like a complete sort of rewiring of the brain and like a change in like how I'm thinking, how I'm being, how I'm acting. I know that for me, what made everything way worse was when I was focusing so much on pain. Like getting into the cult, we did a lot of focusing on, for all the teachings of not being a victim, there was still a lot of like pain, like we're a lot of downs, like romanticizing this like being down emotionally and just like
Yeah.
crashing,
The
you know?
dark night of the soul
Dark.
over and over again.
And like really eroticizing the dark in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I was just talking to someone the other day about we were voice messaging about like Mama Gina's work does this swamping, this just like that, like just
Mhm.
like let me just swim in my emotions and just like and like the and then for me, even therapy to an extent, like doing therapy, going exploring more and more, all I would find is more and more pain, more and more
Yeah.
trauma. I'd have more memories. And then what comes up is like, wow, I'm like so broken. Wow, I can't believe I've had so much stuff. And then it's not at all helpful. Like I think the stuff you were describing about because I think there's a level of that too when you're outside, like when you're on these trips that you describe, it's like life or death sometimes, you know? It's like you
Yeah.
better get your shit together and just like pick it up. And there's this, uh, I also equate that to a lot of people, I think, not wanting to work hard nowadays in certain ways. Like there's like
Mhm.
when you were describing that, I was thinking of, I used to do this too sometimes, never to the full extent I've seen some people do it, but like even in the more, I'll hear women be like, "Oh, I just like I can't do anything today because I'm just bleeding. Like I know I was supposed to show up for this and that, but I'm like on my moon, and so I just like can't do anything all week because I'm on my moon." And I'm just like, okay, I'm all for I'm all for like respecting our bodies in certain ways, but also like, if you have an appointment or you have a thing, like just get up and go do it. And I think that I attribute that to like certain of those qualities why I've never had as extreme adventures of you as you. Just my like being involved in powerlifting or something, like
Yes.
things where it's like you get under the bar and you do it. Like it's really hard. Yeah, it seems like it's just gonna be so hard. Oh, I don't want to do it today. I don't want to what like you just go do it. And like I think there's like people have lost a lot of that too.
Yeah. And, you know, I was just thinking about it in respect too of like, because I could tell so many stories of the excuses that can come out of certain human
Yeah.
beings and spiritual people who are like, I can't do this because blah blah blah. Oh, the energies right now, the this or that. And I'm like, you're running a business. Like,
Yeah.
like you can't just what? Like you could tell stories about that. But then, I think one of the things that I notice as well, as you said, like when there's this real highlight and centered focus on this swampiness and, as I said, the dark night of the soul. And I think it comes into that addiction to these highs of whether it's like going on that ayahuasca journey times 1000, like 1000 times in your life you've done it. Woo! And it's like you go for this dark swampiness, dark night of the soul, whether it's with the drugs or not with the drugs. And it's like you're talking about all the deep, dark emotions that are coming through you and how much you're healing these things. But there's no integration period after it. Like it's just like high, 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 and swamp and swamp and swamp. Instead of like, okay, I've gone through some process, I'm integrating it, and I'm gonna like get at this point then. And then I get to this point and I go for another thing and then I integrate for a certain amount of months. It's just like constant like addiction to swampiness or addiction to like the highs that will deeply connect them to that one consciousness that is connectable if you just settle into the rhythms of life and the rhythms of community and like basic everyday.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about it, like one of the things that I love to do, because I was just thinking about all these rage rituals and, you know, screaming and blah, blah, blah. One of the things that I love to do when I'm feeling like my energy is off center, is go into the ocean. Because I mean, the ocean, as I said, it is quite literally like the womb of the earth. And for humans, like there's a lot of research being done in it that when we enter the ocean, we're actually have similar feelings, like it basically resets our nervous system like we were in our mother's womb. Like
Mm.
that's what it does to our body. And I love going into the ocean and like fetal positioning and like going right where the waves are going to smash you. And you like
Uh,
let the waves like crack you open. And like there's some sort of like joy and deep like craziness of being cracked open by this huge, massive wave. And it's like this force of nature just like cracking you open and you just start giggling and laughing. And that energy like just flows through you so quickly.
we don't get waves like that here. Like I'm
Yeah.
surrounded by ocean, but we're protected, so we don't get the waves.
Yeah.
We still have
You're a while away from Tofino and stuff, aren't you?
Tofino's on the other side of Vancouver Island, so we're just
Yeah,
like Vancouver Island shields us from
from it.
the ocean that's like out. Yeah, we're on the other side of Vancouver Island.
Hmm.
Have you been to Tofino?
Yeah, I worked at a kids camp on Vancouver Island, but we did sea kayaking trips like right up into the Great Bear Rainforest, and then I hiked the Wonderfuka and that's the other one. Those two big trails across it with kids.
Uh,
Yeah, and so I did those as two trips and then, did the whole surfing thing after I'd come back from these like 30-day trips with kids. It was fun.
how do you not drown if you're under the waves, curled up?
Breath work. Strengthen your lungs. Get resilient.
I wanted to do, for a period last summer, I was doing Wim Hof breath for a
Yeah.
while. Not for too long, though, for maybe like a month or so. Because I thought maybe I was like, it'd be good. I don't have very good lung capacity. Maybe I'll build up my lung capacity. But then I didn't really follow through all the way. But I thought that it would be cool to be someone who could like do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I do free diving as well, and I think it's one
Like,
of
how
my
long could you hold your breath?
when
Um,
I'm in my good, powerful mode and I'm not in my mind. So as
yeah.
soon as I start training, so there's going to be nuance to this. I'm really bad if I train for something. If that I'm innately reasonably good if I don't get in my mind. So when I train for free diving, I get in my head really quickly and I might only be able to make like 2.5, 3 minutes. But when I'm not training, I can do 5 minutes, 5.5. But the nuance to this is that every human is capable of this. And within 2 to 3 months, if you're practicing every single day breath holds, you will easily be able to get up to 5 minutes. Like
Really?
that's
So, 'cause I
actually
think even
3 minutes bare
2 minutes
minimum.
feels like a long time. I don't know how long I could hold my breath right now if I.
Well, it's different when you're holding your breath above, like we call it like land holds versus like a underwater hold, because the mammalian reflex, there's this reflex that's within our body, being mammals. It's called the mammalian reflex. And as soon as water hits your face, your body like immediately knows that it's going into water and it holds more. So you can hold your breath for a lot longer under the water versus on land.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'll have to try that too.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said earlier when you were talking about climate change because I think I think it's a really bizarre time right now because it's suddenly a lot of what we thought was true. I think over the past like 5 years has just been like turned on its head. And then I
Yeah.
think especially now the last couple months, it's just been like, whoa, like everything that seemed true, at least in the US, like governmentally, it's like none of this was working the way it was said to be working or like the way people
Yeah.
thought it was going. And so I think the climate change is a really interesting one because that was something that changed. Like, I guess I hadn't realized until really last summer that people seriously like didn't believe in climate change in the sense of like the way that people talk about it today. Like humans are
Mm.
making the climate change, whatever. And I wasn't taught about climate change until college, and I remember we watched a documentary on it, and I was like so devastated by this documentary. I like went out into the forest and I cried, and I just felt that was
Mhm.
when I was just like, wow, like humans shouldn't even be on Earth. And I
Yeah.
sort of uh romanticize that too. Like I remember someone sending me, a friend of mine sent me some group that exists. I can't remember what it's called right now, but they essentially have this manifesto. They're like a writing or poetry site or something, but they like their manifesto is just like humans basically shouldn't exist on Earth and we're just like accepting the doom of humanity. And so I was like, yeah, me too. I'm like accepting like the doom of humanity. And then and I thought I
Because
had
I remember it's in one of your poems as well, like in your
I
poetry
wrote
book.
about it.
I remember you writing about something like this
I
too.
wrote about it in my poetry books. I wrote about like a separate article I wrote about it. I was like really saddened. It's so wild now when I think about it because I think like a lot of these things that were taught to me that I accepted as
Mm.
so true,
Mm.
no one ever taught me that there was an alternative perspective. And it was only
Yeah.
really this past year where I started listening to people where I was like, whoa, there are like actually, really smart people who disagree. Like they agree that maybe like the climate is changing, but they don't agree that like humans are the cause or they don't agree. And I was looking it up more recently and I actually saw that there's a lot of financial reasons to incentivize like why governments would push the narrative of humans causing climate change.
Yes.
But what was wild was like I wrote my whole article about voting for Trump back in November, and someone wrote to me, she sent me an email and she was just like, this whole article, like I can't remember if she liked it enough or not, but she was just like, everything you said, I just like have to tell you. Um, just like I'm really upset that you said you might not believe in climate change anymore. And that was the only sentence that I wrote was just like I don't even know if I believe in climate change now. And she was like my whole life's work has been dedicated to this. I've been like trained in it.
Mm.
All of these things and all these paragraphs she wrote about like I don't remember what they said, but it was just so like climate change is real. And I was reading it and I was like, well, the weird thing about this time is like, you're actually like this, someone like this is the last person that I would actually want to hear from about it because you've been trained by the schools to have this, like, and you have so much at stake because
Yeah.
it is your whole life's work, do you even really have the ability to question it and to consider that it might not be real? And it's this weird time where like everyone like trust the experts. We like actually can't trust the experts in a lot of cases. I think it's good to hear from them. It's but then like to seek out the other sides too of like who are the experts who disagree because those often get pushed down. And
Well, I think that's the thing is it's like there is this level of cognitive dissonance where it's like, well, this is my entire worldview.
Mhm.
And if I start to question that and what you're saying is making me uncomfortable because there could be some little truths within what you're saying. And if I start to question that worldview, that's like one of the whole building blocks of all of my worldview, and everything could come crumbling down around me, and I'm not willing to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard thing. And as I said, like I've listened to enough stories, and I think this is where my brain starts to pick up on things is because I've traveled so much and, as I said, lived in so many remote locations around the world and had the grateful experience of being able to hear stories from elders all around the world. Their stories, when you start to notice a theme within them, and there's many things that those themes of around like what's coming up today, it's like then my mind immediately perks up to it. And I used to like I remember you said in maybe your last podcast or you were an email a while ago about how before you were in a certain program, like you weren't awake at all. And that's what you're grateful for. And I dated somebody who woke me up to the world in COVID. And it was not a relationship that I would like speak highly of at all. But what I'm really deeply grateful for is that before that point, I lived in this wonderful fairyland of like traveling to this place and to that place and doing
Yeah.
this. And I didn't vote and I didn't care about politics. It doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't give a damn. I was just like in this like
Yeah.
flow, feminine flow across the world. And it was just like la la. But he woke me up and made me question things and
Yeah.
made my entire worldview come crumbling down in the most vicious manner. And as I said, like when I started to put these pieces of all these different elders' stories together, and my dad had also been sort of, particularly like if we talk about the climate change, like he also says, climate change is a thing, but not in the way that it's being pushed that humans are the cause. And as I said, my my father and I have spoken about this because at the time I was like, what do you mean you don't believe in climate change? And then he quite literally, because he's in old school, so he was a sort of science professor, teacher, etc. And he doesn't do the new age stuff at all, like won't touch a computer, doesn't touch a mobile phone, like anything like that. But he's a really beautiful, solid man. Like when we are talking about these people who are spiritual without being spiritual, my dad is that. Like he literally only did chemo because he wants to take care of my mother longer. And he's
Oh,
like, I love her so much that I want to be able to outlive her and take care of her for the rest of her life. And it's
oh,
like, that is the depth of unconditional love and like practiced like integrity of this human being. Like, I will put myself through this treatment that I do not want to have for the love of my wife, who I said I would take care of.
yeah.
And anyway, my dad goes away and he's like, come back in a second. And he brings out all these textbooks and all these things.
Uh,
And he like highlights stuff. And then he like drew a whole page, like written, handwritten, a whole page of like what he believes around climate change and drew the elliptical orbit. Because I thought the orbit that the Earth orbited around the sun was just like a circle. And he's like,
yeah.
no, it's an elliptagon, which is like that kind of shape. And
Uh,
he's like, there is times when the Earth is slow, like really, really close to the Earth. Sorry, the sun is close to the Earth. And then there's times where it's like quite far away from it. And he's like, this is the times when we have more solar flares and solar activity, and the Earth is warmer. And this is also the times. And that he said that to me Oh, that was maybe around the time that I skied across Greenland, so 2018.
Mhm.
And I had that in the back of my mind, but I was still like, the world, we need to take care of it. And he's like, yeah, of course. Like, we really are not doing well with plastics in the ocean, with this, with that, whatever. Like, we're creating toxic stuff everywhere. And then if you believe in chemtrails, etc., like you are literally like wiping out populations of stuff. You're affecting weather anyway. Like, yes, of course, we're causing actual change in climate. Um, but yeah, and then when I started to wake up in COVID, I had a really rude awakening, and my whole worldview just got smashed apart, and it went down the dark tunnel of like, oh my God, we're screwed, like fear around everything. And then
Yeah.
afterwards, I was like grateful, grateful that I could start to question things.
Hmm.
Yeah, just, and even when I work at the university, like, and do lectures, because a lot of what, because it's all environment based and, nature therapy and nature healing based and all those sorts of things that we teach. And when there's lectures around those sorts of stuff, if I'm asked to do stuff around climate change, it's always making students question everything and be
Hmm.
like, okay, well, what about this? But what about this? What about this? Because I want people to think about things like electric cars, for instance. It's like, okay, you think that's the best thing to reduce emissions, but how are you charging them? Oh, you're still charging them with coal-powered energy, not solar power. Okay, and if you are doing it off solar power and all the things that it takes to create an electric car, where are those things being mined from and what's the impacts of those mines?
Hmm.
And it's, yeah, when you start to look at all of that stuff, it creates a lot of questions in your mind. And
Hmm.
it's not saying that one or the other is actually correct. It's just saying, look at stuff, question stuff.
Yeah, it's like the ability to have there be grays instead of just this
Yeah.
black and white. Like it is
Yeah.
this way or it isn't this way, or like they say it's this, so the narrative is this.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's like it's very clear how a lot of those narratives are just used to control people in so
Mm.
many ways because it does become this like you have to accept this way of thinking and this belief.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not like accepted in society or seen as reasonable. Um, but yeah, I think like all of the different we lose out. It's so important for us as humans to be able to have conversations and listen to all sides of an issue. And we have just,
Mm.
it seems like we've
Mm.
completely lost that because we can't really refine our thinking when we don't have conversations. Whether it's like you're having a conversation that's just going to strengthen your viewpoints more, help you think about it more, or you're going to hear other viewpoints that make you like question like, "Huh, do I think that actually? I don't know. Maybe I
Mm.
don't." And I think like first of all, people have lost the willingness to even have those conversations in the first place, a lot of the times, because we go, like, I've seen people go into this like panic state. Like, when
It's
they start
triggered.
to have a conversation with like someone who might disagree, it's like the anxiety goes way up, and it's like, we like can't, this is scary to disagree at all. But then on top of that, it's like, if somebody does have the conversation, a lot of the time that openness is not there. I heard someone say the other day, like, if you're having a conversation and part of you can't at least say, like, I could be wrong,
Mm.
then what kind of, you're not even really having a conversation, right? Like, then you're not even talking to someone who can
Yeah.
actually, like, and I think that's what I've noticed a lot because I change my mind so much. I used to see that as such a bad quality because people would be like, oh, she's changing her mind again, or oh, she can't like commit to things or whatever. People used to say that when I was younger. People, my family mainly. But like, uh, but now I'm like, if somebody doesn't change their minds, that's more of a red flag. Because it's like
Yeah.
you should always, I think when we lose, I think a large part for me too of being able to get out of a cult was my willingness to have my worldview crumble.
Yeah.
And like when we lose that willingness, and I think a lot of people actually don't have that. I heard this guy say the other day about he's like a psychologist or some, or no, a evolutionary. I don't know, some sort of thing. But he was saying how the main thing he's been surprised by humans is like our ability to take a position and then just like never change it. It's kind of like the main downfall of humans is like getting attached to thinking a certain way and then just like
Yeah.
being completely unwilling to change our minds.
I look at it as well as like one, when you're talking about that willingness to have your worldview be crumbled and to recognize that you could be wrong or this or that could be happening, to question things, it's like that curiosity about the world, like that ever, whether it's a curiosity to learn more, curiosity to like, try something new, etc. That's one of the sexiest things on the planet is that curiosity about everything. Um, but I also see it really strongly within like people who have gone through, let's just say like sexual assault, for example, something like that. And the community or the family or the whatever, the close people around them who know the person who might have done this sort of stuff, they're unwilling to have their worldview of that particular thing shattered or that particular person shattered because it just means that their entire life could come crumbling down. And so that's why often, like, women with abusive partners or women with, or mothers of children who have been assaulted by partners or whatever, they're unwilling to have their entire life come crumbling down. And so they uphold this vision and make things worse for people because they can't deal with that particular matter.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think it comes into, as I said, that cognitive dissonance of like just not being able to deal with something and being able to see the truth and to be able to re-evolve like death and rebirth and get back into that cycle, that rhythm of life, because we are supposed to go through constant recycles, rebirths. And like you said, like how many times have you tried to change your mind around certain things? Like there was things that I was adamant like 15 years ago, like adamant about, completely different person than I think about that now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think causes, like, why do you think some people cannot do that? Or do you think some people actually can't, or they just
I
don't?
think I think it's an unwillingness to like there's a comfort in living the way that they are blinded to what's going on because it's too scary. Like
Hmm.
it's too scary for that certain thing to be true. It's too scary for them for that to be true. And they don't want to step out of the comfort, even though that life on the other side, once you get past the pain of it all, can actually be really freeing. And like there could be a very different level of life available to you. It's too scary to think that. It's like, think about any time that you're in the end of a relationship and you know that it's ending.
Yeah.
And you're like, you don't want to let it end and you want to hold on to it, but there's so much pain and there's like, it's definitely ended. And
Yeah.
it's like the energy has ended and you're just holding on for dear life, like ripping onto this thing because you can't see past what could be available to you past this. And it's like,
Yeah.
within yourself, it's dead, it's gone, it's ended. This needs a rebirth, etc. And there's
Yeah.
going to be a hell of a lot of pain to process in between. But once you get through that, there's this rebirth, and you might actually date somebody down the track, or you might be single and having the most, you know, ecstatic experiences of your entire life, and you're the happiest you've ever been. And you
Yeah.
realize, good God, I'm so glad that I've stepped past that thing. So it's like that willingness to evolve.
I think too, as you're saying that, it makes me think like it reminds me that the more you do it, also, I think the easier it gets in a
Yeah.
sense. Like, not that it ever becomes easy because it can be excruciating, but I think like you at least have done it before to know that what you're feeling isn't the whole reality. Like, you know
Yeah.
that like there is, like, you've done it before and you know that there's like something better on the other side,
Yeah.
even though it's scary each time to really trust that. um, the more that you do it, I think you do build up a sense of it really like trust, like faith. Like you're just
Mhm.
like, yeah, I do, I can do it again because I've done it before and I trust that it.
I'm going to live through it. And you also start to trust that bodily wisdom, like all the signals that are telling you certain things, whether it's like, as I said, whether it's within a relationship or whether it's within a conversation, like there's a bodily signal that is being emitted to that is like your intuition that is kicking in.
Yeah. It's such a deep, uh, though I'm thinking the most recent time that that happened to me was just when we decided to move because we're gonna move back to the States
Mm.
probably this year, and it was just came out of nowhere, and it was just suddenly like, oh my God, like,
Mm.
we bought this house thinking we're gonna be here for like 10, 15, 20 years, like our whole life,
Yeah.
and it was just all of a sudden like we're not supposed to be here anymore. And it was just so clear. And I was just like, oh no, this is so inconvenient. And I remember talking to someone about it, and she was like, well, this feels really sudden, or maybe you don't have to, or, it doesn't necessarily mean whatever. And I was like, I hear you, but like, I've had this feeling a lot of times before, and I just know it. And like, I was like, this is terrible because it's so inconvenient for a lot of reasons. But it's also just this is like the next step. And not that that was like one of the hardest ones ever because relationships or
Did it? I'm intrigued because you're in a relationship and you would have had this intuitive hit, like I know that you do with most things. Like you have
Mhm.
really strong bodily signals that tell you stuff. And it's like, okay, you get that hit. Well, this is not where I was supposed to be. And did Jordan sort of like have that hit in a similar way at a similar time? Or was it like you were like, this is what
Yeah.
I'm feeling? Yeah.
Uh, isn't it so it's a really good question. I don't know if it's just luck or if Jordan and I think we're both quite attuned to that.
Mm.
And luckily, like we have both changed a ton, but we've grown in the same way. Like we've changed like our views on
Yeah.
things and things have like changed together. Uh, Not that we 100% agree on every point, but there's just like this trend that we've trended together, and I think that's just kind of funny. It happened together. So like what was funny, I don't think Jordan will mind me saying this. He When I came to that realization, it was in part because I was feeling it, but then also I kind of teased him about it. Like I was like, "Oh, maybe we should move to America." And he was like, "Actually, like I did that because he had been like 100% no to it before."
Mm. Hmm.
And he was all of a sudden like, well, I did actually ask some of my friends the other day about like moving from Canada to the States. And I was like, you did? And then once I knew that that door was like a little open for him,
Yeah.
then it like took over. Like I was just like, oh my God, I want to move so bad. And I had been feeling it for
Mm.
like a year at least prior, but I couldn't fully let myself feel it because I didn't think it was possible because I didn't think he would want to.
Yeah.
So I had had this sense of like missing America and missing like home for me. And but then what was really funny was like when I was so like I became very certain really quickly then because I was just like, oh my God, this is like I really want this and I just feel like this is just next for us. This is what we have to do. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later where he was like, I didn't tell you this before, but like a few weeks before we even had that conversation where he had been open to it, he was like, I had a dream where in the dream basically someone was like singing a song to him. I can't remember his whole dream, but it was basically like singing like America, like the place for you and me and like America. Like he had this song where someone was like singing like someone was singing to him like about going to America and being American and he was like this doesn't make any sense in my life. And then like a few weeks later all that stuff happened. So it seems to be uh both of us tend to like just have the same things happen at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing though, to be that in tune with each other as well.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
love that it came through like dream form for him. That makes me really happy as well.
Yeah. I think we
Mm.
like, there's certain things too. Like when I left the cult, he had already been like really done. Like he was kind of
Yeah.
so I was we were sort of on different wavelengths for a little where I was still like really in and he was sort of like I don't know. But then even then like as I left and I started to like deconstruct what had happened, then he started to like realize and deconstruct like parts of it for him as well. And so yeah, we sort of move in tandem. Like one of us will like go forward first and then the other
Mm,
will like go along. Um, yeah, it is really interesting in that way.
mm.
Yeah. Tell me about I'm curious like what changed for you over COVID when you like describe this whole like shattering.
Um, so as I said, it came from dating somebody. And I actually saw I saw the quality of being so heavily involved in politics and talking about politics as like annoying to me.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, who's talking about this again? And I was just like, ugh. Um, but he would get on these rants and like it would be like "Brah, brah, 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 brah." And it would be into the night. Like it would be hours on a rant about something to do with politics. And I, as I said, like lived on a cloud
Yeah.
like my whole adult life. Um, there's a lot of beautiful things that that life has given me, like deep connection to nature, deep connection to cultures and things like that. And not a worrying of, as I said, there's certain amounts of fear mongering. So there can be fear mongering, like if we're going to talk about sides, there's fear mongering on both sides.
Mhm.
And so I had doubled in this world where there was like, I was making love to life every day. There was magic every day. I could find magic every day. And then I, when COVID first started, I was out on our property, on our farm. And I just went back there and I didn't expect it to be a thing. I was like, oh yeah, a couple of months, totally fine. This is the greatest. Like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna be at home. I went through like a deep breakup. I'd been living in Tanzania before that. And like was creating my entire, adult life was going to be there because my fiance at the time, like we owned like a retreat center together. We a venture company, all these sorts of things. Like we were building a pretty cool life over there. And then I came home and I was like, all right, new life. What are we doing? And I was like, okay, I'll live on the farm. And it was a pretty cool first year of COVID because it was so in tune with like the rhythms of life because we weren't allowed to go anywhere. Like Australia, like locked everything down to the extreme. Um, like you couldn't even leave districts, like it was like, and I was really grateful because I was on farm. And yeah, I was like watching ducks have ducklings and watching the ducklings grow up. And I was like homeschooling or helping homeschool like my nieces. And like I just remember like days and days on end, like literally laying in paddocks of grass and looking up at the sky and just like watching clouds and like just having such a really deeply connected to family, to the community of a farm life, like what needs to be done and just like watching, as I said, the nature shift and change through all seasons. And so it was really beautiful. And then at the end of the year, I was like, COVID's still a thing. Probably gonna have to adult. And I hadn't adulted in Australia since I was 18. Like I hadn't lived here for years. And so I was like, all right, where have I always wanted to live in Australia? And I was like, what's possible to me right now? And so I moved to the place where I always went to the ocean as a kid, on holidays, on summer holidays. And I moved there. And then I ended up starting to date this person who was heavily into politics. That was obviously not the reason why I was attracted to them. And he kept on getting blasted by my political opinions and was like, oh, stop that. You're ruining my magic. Because it was like ingested with like, this is what's wrong with the world. And this is like,
Yep.
and like everything that we're talking about, like I was just like, yeah, trust that it's always going to work out because I've always lived in flow. Um,
Mhm.
and he was like, you should not blindly trust. And it was just like being hammered with all of this stuff and policies. And I had not really given a damn about who I voted for, if I ever voted, because I was just like, oh, there's a Greens party. They're going to be good about the environment. I like the environment. Let's just go them. And then he would hammer me about their policies. And he was like, do you realize that they're actually doing worse for the environment? Why? And he's like, have you ever read that? And I was like, interesting. I have never read that. And then he was like also really into American politics, and I had nothing, like no idea. Like I know that you guys have a different system to us. There's only two parties, which becomes really separated.
Yeah.
Um, and so he was hammering me things about that, and I was like, America, like I don't want to know. It's bad enough
Who
that you're
cares?
hammering me like about Australian stuff. And anyway, life was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Um, it was very, very difficult to like I knew in my body that I didn't want to do the thing. I was like, it's my body, it's my choice, and I will never be penetrated by something that's not my choice. I will not be force penetrated. And that was like, I just intuitively knew that I didn't want to do it. And I was like, if all of these people are saying that we have to do it, and I could see the guilt tripping, all of the guilt tripping, like your grandmother is going to die. Like this person's going to die if you don't do this for them.
Wasn't it? I mean, what was so crazy about that to me was the flip, because I had
Yeah.
always been so my body, my choice. And then it was
Yeah.
like flipped on me. Like the
Yeah.
same people who had agreed with that were suddenly like, you have to do this or you're killing everyone.
Yeah. And so I was just
What?
like, whoa. And I like, I mean, I'd always had, yeah, so my body, my choice as well. But I had never thought about like, I don't know spiritually if I could ever, do things like abort babies or whatever else, just because I'd been brought
Well,
up
I think now
Christian.
I don't really think, I think my views on abortion have completely flipped too, which is like a
Yeah.
whole deep dive for, like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like alarm. I'm just like,
Yeah.
that's a whole different topic, but I'm just like, oh my God, we're killing babies. Like, I,
And like obviously like we know there's nuance to this, absolute nuances to it. But one of the things that he brought up was some of these policies around abortion that were like saying, like I thought my limited knowledge of abortion policies was like up until a certain stage, like up into like I think it was like 10 or 12 weeks was what I thought in that it was. And as I said, I've never really thought deeply about whether I sort of have always known spiritually. I don't know if I could personally do it, but I also wanted it available for people who needed it and whatever else.
yeah,
So it was like always this freedom of choice. And then he started talking to me about the policies. And I was like, I never read the policies. So I just sort of jumped on the bandwagon of what everybody thought and just rolled with that.
yeah,
And he was like, do you realize that you can actually get an abortion in certain places, like pretty much right up until due date? And I was like, what the?
yeah,
And it was like not medical, like as in not for a medical reason, etc. It was like, and then he started going into tons of different policies that I had no idea about, because there would be like people outcrying about this crazy thing that was happening with the environment over here. And why is this person doing this thing and they're ruining this? And I was like, oh my God, they're ruining the environment. I love the environment. I'm in the environment all the time. And then he would be like, have you looked at this policy and why this policy is there and why they're fighting for this particular thing? And then this is what it's actually going to do. And I was like, oh, no, I've never read any of that stuff ever.
yeah.
Or like, you hear a snippet of something that somebody said, or like a couple of things that people have hashed together from a whole conversation. And I think about it like, even it's a little bit scary having this kind of conversation, because it's like anybody could snip any parts of what we say together to be able to create whatever worldview they want to.
Yeah.
And I was hearing snippets of things and being like, that person's the devil, they're the worst. And then he was like, have you actually heard the entire conversation? And then he would play the whole conversation for me. And I was
Yeah.
like, wow, that was a completely different context on what I thought I was listening to and what I was getting riled up about, but there's no point in getting riled up about.
And then you realize you're being like purposefully lied to.
Yeah. And then that's where it's like the manipulation on all fronts. So as I said, like the world was getting smaller and smaller and smaller for me. And I was thinking a lot about, you know, I guess because there was so much fear coming in from this other side where it was like, this is how they're manipulating us and this is what's happening. And the whole world is like, I was like, wow, like I don't know if I want to fall fully into that because I'll fall into depression.
Mhm.
And so then it was like trying to step away from all that fear mongering of like, our whole world is going down the drain. What do we do to, how do I find magic every single day again?
Mhm.
If my mind is capable of these innate feats, and I know from like, you know, listen to stories of like Nelson and Mandela, who was actually stuck in a prison cell for like 20 odd years, and then other people who have like been in prisoner of war camps and what they've done with their mind and where they've been able to go, and then knowing that like astral projection is available to us and like meditation where you can literally like, you know, touch into other parts of the planet, etc. And then you can connect to these deep things. And then I started to attract in people who could teach me a lot more on dream traveling and tapping into this one consciousness and, you know, being able to have conversation with all beings. And it was that opened my world again in a very small time. So yeah, it went from like everything's crashing on top of me, and I'm like, oh my God, my whole worldview is being flipped open. But really, I'm being taught to question things. And I was also being taught to have conversations because he was very, very into arguing, even if there was no argument to be had. And I've always been a very like, hello, don't really care. Like,
Oh,
if you have that opinion, that's great. Not affected by it. And it would be like aggressively put the opinion on me. And I would be like, oh, okay. And so it was like being taught to have conversations that I didn't possibly agree with, and then start to realize actually maybe I don't even have a really strong opinion or understanding of anything. And maybe I need to like think about things and question things. And then to be able to hold that questioning of everything
yeah.
and look at where is something coming from, because something I've always been good with is the emotions and picking up on people's energetics and looking into anything that anyone is talking about, whether it's a politician, whether it's a famous person, whatever, and looking into the energetics of what is making them speak like that, what is actually coming through them, is it actual truth, how do I feel in my body, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like a change that have seen in myself that I hear like reflected in what you're saying is I feel like in the past I had a lot of really strong opinions, but I didn't really know anything. Like
Yeah.
I hadn't really looked at anything in detail. I hadn't looked at different sides, but I was like very certain that I knew the right answer. And now I
Yeah.
feel like I know a lot more and I know enough to know that I like don't know the answer at all, really.
Yeah.
And I still like have an opinion, but I'm a lot more like, I don't know, like I don't know. I have to refine this opinion more, you know?
Yeah, and I think there's a humbleness to that as well, because you have a lot more of available information at your fingertips. And it's like, I also think, you know, there's a humbleness when you're sitting around elders a lot and listening to their lifelong experiences of different stuff. You get a lot of information, and you're not going to like fight them on what their like life experiences have been. It's actually really interesting to know why they think a certain way about sex, why they think a certain way about like relationships, why they think a certain way about all things. Like even, you know, with my old boys that I hang out with down here, they talk about the way that the sand has changed every year. And
Yeah.
like they can tell me, they can track because they've been surfing this beach since they were kids. And
Yeah.
it's like there's been 70 years of longshore drift, which is like the movement of the sand up and down and how it's changed the beaches.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's really interesting to hear how that then has affected like the migration of different like fish at different times. And it's really interesting just to tap in and tune in and listen, not only to your elders, but listen to everything like nature around you, because there's so much going on that's available to us.
we've become really disconnected from older people,
Mm,
which is like really sad and really I feel it so deeply whenever I interact with someone. Like I just had a, well, this will come out before this episode comes out, but I recorded an episode recently with an 85-year-old Jewish woman here on the
yeah.
island because I wanted to talk to her about like the Israel-Palestine, like I wanted to know what it's been like for her as a Jewish woman,
Mm,
and especially being that old, what's amazing, like you've lived through so many decades of things changing. And I think like there were so many things more that I wanted to talk to her about that I didn't even get to. Maybe I'll get to have her back on or something, but like she mentioned just casually like she was involved in the women's movement in like the 70s, like getting the first credit because women couldn't have credit cards until like that the
yeah.
70s, you know? And she was like involved in
They
that.
couldn't have
I
bank
remember that.
accounts.
Yeah. And so there's like for me I think part of the reason we feel such a, because now I feel like I'm looking at feminism and I'm like, this did not go well in a number of ways for women, I think. However, what's sort of missing is like, you also have to, like, I think it would be really interesting to talk to the women who lived through certain aspects of it because like I think
Mm,
it's important women got to have credit cards, you know, like these things, like these certain
yeah.
aspects of it. I would love to hear like what was the intention of this movement when you were in it, and like did you ever foresee these things changing, or how did you think
Yeah.
about them, you know? And when we are like we are so detached from the people who have lived through these actual parts of history that we can only see. I was listening today to someone, like a debate. What was he saying? Basically, like until it wasn't until the 2000s that I mean, you saw this even with like the transgender stuff. You saw this massive spike in like the 2010s,
Mm,
right? And it becomes really easy for people to be like, well, this is just always like transgender people
mm,
have always existed. It's always been here, blah, blah, blah. But without talking to someone who lived even in like the 80s, the 70s, and being like, what was society actually like then? Because like this wasn't actually at all like it is now.
yeah.
But when we're
Yeah.
we're living now and we can only see like our lifetimes, we're like, this is just how it is, and we lose the context of like all of human history when it hasn't been that way.
Yeah. Well, this is why this community of like actually being de deeply connected to any type of community where you have this things of like elders speaking to youngers. Like we talk about it a lot in groups of people that I've been working with, like, and even friends and stuff, even around relationships. And it's like, okay, what does it mean to be a relationship coach? Like that's what we trained to do, like
Yeah.
sex and relationship therapy. But then I think about these women that I'm friends with in their 70s who have had 40-year long marriages or more,
Yeah.
40, 50-year marriages. Um, and, you know, like one of my best friends is 76 and she is the most lit up, amazing woman. She's like a second mother to me. Um, and she travels and she does art and she's like really tuned in and hip and like just amazing woman. And like the advice that she's given me throughout the last 20 years of knowing her has been like insurmountable. Like what she's told me about relationships, what she's told me to actually look for in partners. And like I might have like dismissed it at a certain time, but it's always stuck with me. And I've come back to that. And I just the power of some of the things that these people say,
Yeah.
it's yeah.
You need that wisdom of a life experience. And
Mm.
like, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who is older is like
Is
wiser.
wise.
They're not
No.
all wise. There's a lot of older people doing terrible things. But I think there
Yeah.
is something in that. Jordan and I were just talking the other day about how I was like, you know, we know a lot of people who do so much like conscious relationship work, and like we see so
Mm.
many people in polarity is another thing we've been talking about
Yeah.
recently. We're like, Jordan and I both had these phases, but we no longer like do any of that in our relationship. Like we aren't doing these relationship practices and this like deep
Yeah.
relationship principles of like and when I look at people who are continuously doing it all the time, I'm just like they portray this like higher level of relationship because you're doing the work and you're doing this deep work constantly. And I was saying to Jordan the other day, like, people like his parents who've been married for, I don't know, 40 years, could I be somewhere
Yeah.
around there, 40 plus, must be. Um, they know more having never done any of that than a lot of these
Yeah.
people, because there's this wisdom of like, we've been married for this long and like we know a lot of aspects of what that takes. And there's a lot of respect in that. And when I look at a lot of couples who are just constantly doing work,
Yeah.
like that's weird to me. That shouldn't be necessary.
Well, it's like, where is the living? Where is the everyday presence, I guess? And I, spending a lot of time at home across the last few years, I guess I've spent quite a lot of time with my parents. And yeah, like I've also looked at this fact of like, what does it mean to actually be a relationship coach when my parents, who I thought, oh, do they really have like this, the most highly evolved relationship? Like, are they doing these conscious practices? And then I actually start to look at it and see the everyday practices they do to connect. And it's like, this is a lifetime of deep presence that they've had with each other. Like, I looked at these, there's so many things that I didn't realize. Like, as I said, my dad, if you imagine like typical farmer, like, yes, he's a Christian man, but he's like a typical farmer. And he's like, this is this, like super strong in himself. And that's it. And I would never have seen him as a romantic. But he brings my mum a cup of tea and first, like, and foremost, like a cup of hot water with like lemon and ginger in it in the morning.
Uh,
And I was like, I wondered about this. And I was like, she's actually kind of romantic doing that. But what actually made it even more romantic for me was I found out that the reason that he started doing that was my grandfather, who I never met, so he died before I was born, had come to visit my mum and dad in Australia because my mum's a Kiwi, my dad's an Australian. And he'd come over to visit, and my mum was pregnant with her first child. And so she was really excited, and her dad was like, I'm going to help you with this child. I can't wait to meet him. He's going to be like my first, I really want to meet, like, whatever. And she was really, really excited about that. And he passed away on the last day of this trip in their house. And
oh,
every morning of his trip, he had bought her a cup of tea in bed.
oh,
And so my dad had seen this and knew that my mum was obviously deeply grieving because her mother had passed away in her early teens. And so she now had no parents. And like my dad had known what it was like to lose brothers and things like that at very early ages. And so he knew this deep grief and he was like, well, how can I reach her? And every morning he repeated the ritual that
oh.
her father had done. And he has done it every day of their life, bringing her and serving her in the morning. And then in the afternoon, because they're both teachers, they would get home from school and they would have a cup of tea together and they'd be like kids out of the house. And it was like their half an hour to deconstruct their day, having a cup of tea. And it was like we were not allowed to interact. It was like, go play, go do your chores, come back later. And I
Oh.
look at these things and they used to go for walks together and things like that. And it was just like this was their way amongst 5 children and a farm and craziness that was going on to connect with each other every single day. And then I look at this point now where my mum is not the person that she used to be because she literally has stuff eating away. And it's like through all of the changes within her, my dad's still top priority is I will do this chemo treatment because I love her unconditionally and want to take care of her to the day that she dies because I promised her I would do that. And I'm like, that's unconditional love. Like, what have I been accepting before this point?
Well, I think there's like two things there that you touch on. Like one is just that um I think that's just the purpose of life in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, right? Is to like actually be that loving and to like
Yeah.
be in that energy of love so much that that is what you're doing. And I think the other piece is like people often, I think that gets lost too, I see, especially in people of our age, but just like people who are sort of performing a lot of polarity type things or whatever. It's like at some point life happens too.
Yeah.
Like there's gonna be sickness, there's gonna be like all these different elements where like things are not gonna
Maybe
be
something hard.
sexy.
Hmm.
Like, and I think that's the deeper, like the real beauty is being willing to do that with someone.
Being willing to connect through all of that and not to just like give up and disconnect because it's hard or, the excuses of this doesn't feel good in my body anymore, or like I can swipe and find the next thing within 24 hours. Like
Yeah.
that's that's what I worry about, in today's society is it's so easy to just be like, next.
Yeah.
Like, or even for spiritual people who don't have that kind of resiliency to be there through the tough.
Yeah. I that's that beauty to me of marriage in a way
Mhm.
is that like I didn't understand it before I got married. I was just like, like what's marriage? Marriage is nothing. I'll just get divorced a bunch of times. Like I don't care. Like I was just like when I first met Jordan, he was like, I do want to get married one day. And I was like, I could get divorced 4 times. I don't care. Like it doesn't mean anything to me. And he was just kind of like, that alarms me a little bit. And I was like, I don't know, just And then it changed for me. And by the time we got married, I was just like, wow, I didn't realize that I would be able to commit for life like
Yeah.
that. And it took on such a deeper meaning for me being able to really say, like, no matter what happens, no matter anything, like, that's the spiritual practice, is just
Yeah.
like, I'm with you forever. It doesn't matter, like, my identity changes or my needs or my whatever, like my personal anything,
Hmm.
because it's like I'm sacrificing like my ego identity of whatever personal whims or to be with this person, to like make this
Yeah.
union with you forever, no matter what. And then when we have children, like it's even more, because then it's just like, well, everything then is really about my family. And I think
Yeah.
like it's like that sort of whether it's to family, husband, God, consciousness, as you say it, like I think there's got to be this bigger thing
Hmm.
that we're putting ourselves aside for, not in this like martyr way, but this like, I think there's like a maturity in that of
Yeah.
just like, I'm no longer just doing my ego things. There's like something bigger here that
And
matters.
I think that's when you find, I keep on talking about this placelessness that people have, this lostness. And it's like when you actually are embedded in a community and serving
Yeah.
and have your place, your people. As I said, it could literally just be living in the woods and being connected to everything that is around you, the orbit of life. Or it's like being in a family system and having your daily rituals and watching the seasons go by and watching your children grow. And it's like that's a sense of place and a sense of like, yeah, within the
Perfect.
cosmic structure. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I think we're getting to the end, but I will wrap up by I think uh I want to kind of circle back to something we were touching on at the beginning which was like I feel like a lot of these things we're talking about, like even like how much the world has gone into this separation, how much has changed, all of
Mm.
that was so much more alarming to me. Like the same sort of things were putting me in this fear state,
Yeah.
which now put me in this like joy state. Like even just the idea, like when I read the news or I see all these things, it is rare that I'm like, I mean, I don't tend to seek out like very violent or whatever types of things, but like it doesn't put me into stress. It like makes me like excited about the world and like where we're going. And it's like every day often feels now like what an exciting time to be alive. Like this is just the most crazy time. We're gonna see so much change. Are we gonna see like robots where everyone's gonna have a robot? Like just
Yeah.
so much is happening and changing. And before I think like I was in such a more dysregulated state of like just more fear state, I guess, in general. And everything would terrify me. Like the place that we're at in the
Mm.
world is just like every new piece, it was like, oh, like you could see so many things in different ways and be like, oh no, corruption. Oh no, this like terrible.
Yeah.
Everything's terrible. And what I found was like as I started to focus more on healing and joy and fun, that
Got to
it
see it.
started to take on this new energy of like, whoa, this is just crazy. Like, what an exciting time of existence. And kind of trusting that, like, all these things that are changing are not inherently bad just because they're changing. It's just like, whoa, I get to participate in this. And, like,
In this
yeah,
wild ride.
yeah, what an adventure.
Yeah, and it's, you know, people in spiritual realm will call it like New Earth or you know, some people even call it 3D versus 5D. Whether that's all that dimensional stuff, I would slightly disagree with those dimensions. But anyway, um, it's it's interesting to look at it like that and to be like, okay, well, if we're creating new earth, like, and we're creating heaven on earth, like there obviously has to be a deconstruction period where our worlds come crumbling down, and we're in the crumbling period. Like everything's crumbling, structures are crumbling, people's thoughts, ideologies, everything is crumbling. And it's like, what is going to be birthed out of that? And what can we, like, if, as I said, if AI is jumping forward at this particular rate, the human body is also innately able to do all of that as well. Like our, you know, cellular structures are also upgrading at the same speed. Like it's just
And it
wildly,
becomes so blended with it.
it does. And it's wild like what's possible and what people are talking about that is possible. And that it's common knowledge. Like, you know, we talked about telepathy on the inside and back in the days and stuff. And now it's like there's podcasts about it. And it's like there's actually research, like you know, there's research into exchanging information through dream state. And I know that I'd done that when I was a kid, and I was like, okay, I've exchanged dreams with like other people and we'd had the same dream. Or I could astral travel and visit somebody and tell them everything that they've done in their day. And it's like I knew that was possible, but it was very woo to speak about. But now like MIT and Harvard are like, and I think the Montreal University in Montreal is involved as well. And it was like this huge like research thing on like how two people put together, if one is studying something, that the other person can transmit that in sleep time to the other person. So all the information that they've had can literally like cross over to the other person. And
What?
it's like, this is what I'm saying. Like, imagine if we actually meditate together or like do this purposely. And it's like, I want to be the body surfing world champion. Why can't I tap into the actual champions, like skill levels, and then tap into reading the ocean? It's like
You
anything's possible.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about people's stories of doing things just like that.
Yeah.
Like tap, like not even knowing. Well, you even hear it with people who get like certain brain injuries or different things, right? And they suddenly like can speak a different language or whatever. Like
Yeah.
stuff like that weirdly happens.
I started being able to feel other people's heartbeats after my brain injury. And then that's when I could start to see things. And I can't control it as much, but I could start to see images that people were having in their brains. And I was like, I'm going fucking crazy. And I wasn't. And it was just, it was like when I went into a head injury support group, the brain surgeon there was talking about how it basically takes a filter off that filters consciousness in an easy, decipherable way for people. But when you have a brain injury, that filter gets like,
Yeah.
and so you now have attachment to everything. Like I can see perspectives for a tree, and it's, yeah, it's wild.
You would know it too, like anyone who's been around my brother. Like my brother had such a severe TBI that
Yeah.
he's in a wheelchair. He was in a coma for a long time. But while he has a lot of limitations, especially physically, and like he
Mhm.
kind of sometimes he like is like a teenage boy mentally, sometimes like a little kid. Like, he really, it's hard to tell really what's going on in his brain. However, he has this, first of all, he's always happy. He like, I don't know if he just doesn't have moods. I'm not we don't really know like what he feels, but he's always, you get close to him and there's this like aura of peace.
Mm.
He's
Mhm.
just like happy. Everything is funny. Anything could happen. Like someone could die, anything, and he's just like, huh, he'll like make a joke. But you get near him and it's just this like calm.
Mm.
And you're
Mhm.
like, yeah, like he's I don't know where, but like something is different that's
He's
allowing
connected to
him to access
consciousness.
some different state. Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
something else. It's like when you take a drug or whatever, like something, there's a different filter.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's wild. Ah, what a wild time. I could talk to you for so long, but I feel like for everyone, we'll wrap up here.
Yeah.
There any final things you want to say like on the recording that we didn't
Um,
touch on?
I don't think so. I think that's kind of like, yeah, I think that's it. I think we just had a beautiful time. This has been great.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to tell everyone where people could connect with you if they want to like follow you or are you on?
Yeah, I think Instagram's probably the best place to connect with me. I don't advertise a lot of what I do anymore because I kind of just do it when people reach out. I run retreats, adventure, and just kind of mix a little bit with tantra, I guess. Like the way that I see it is like making love to life in every moment. And like, we're swimming with whales in Tonga at the end of the year, and
Oh,
yeah, there's going to be some really magical, cool stuff that I'll be doing with that. And just reach out to me about that. I do coaching with like coaching, whatever you want to call it, certain people. Um, and yeah, I have some courses as well. But as I said, I just talk to me.
okay.
Adventures of a Wild Child.
We'll put links and I'll put it
Yeah.
in the show notes so people could connect with you if they want to.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.